And you guys are going to have those. And I guess if I could say anything to start this session, is that don't be afraid to push those boundaries. Let your administration know what you're doing ahead of time. That's really helpful. Get an extra set of eyes. Get some parents in there and say, hey, how would you receive this? Get your principal. Don't do anything under, don't just say, hey, I had this idea this morning. Okay, I never did that. I would shoot an email to my principal, or I'd say, hey, come in, stop in. Hey, if you need to stop the class at any point, just let me know. But we cannot be afraid to go where our kids are at. I mean, it's like us knowing that there's a country that needs to hear the gospel, and we just send them emails. And I think for years, that's what we were doing in Christian education. Yeah, I'm going to pray about that. Okay, that's nice. You should pray about that, but you should also enter into their world and say, hey, let me help you understand what I think Jesus thinks about this. We have to be willing to do those things, because if we don't, we're always going to be ministering from a distance. And I think too many times in Christian education, we teach to the lowest common denominator. We think about the most conservative family we have, and we say, well, we don't want to offend them. I don't want to offend them either, but if I've got 99 kids over here who are in culture, who are being influenced, who are being shaped by culture, and I'm only teaching to this one kid, it would make sense to me to say, you know what, you may need to leave our school. Now, you are welcome to stay, but if this is not a good fit for you, then I think you maybe need to go, because we're making sure that these 99 kids get trained. And I remember I was in Dayton, Tennessee at Bryan College, and we were at a Summit Educators Conference, and I was sitting there, and it was just, once again, beginning stages for us of Worldview. And there was a teacher from Kansas City, and we became real fast friends. And he told me, he said, when you do this, he says, call me. He says, because people will not be happy. He said, and I'm like, people love me. I'll be fine. And we started doing it, and I started calling him. He said, I told you. He said, but here's the thing. You've got to be willing to do it. You cannot be afraid to offend people. Now, I'm not trying to offend people for the sake of offending them, but I'm trying to say, if these are where our kids are at, if we know that they're struggling with sex, if we know that they're struggling with issues, if we know that they're struggling with cutting, if we know that they're struggling with alcohol, substance abuse, we have to talk about those things. If we know that there's a song out there that everybody's listening to, and that song has a worldview behind it, we have to talk about it. And so I would just encourage you with that. In the book, Understanding the Times, Summit Ministries, probably, if you haven't read this book, I read the original one, and it was really good. Doc Noble is a phenomenal person. And I just emailed Jeff a couple weeks ago, because this sat on my table for almost a year, because I was like, I read the first one, and just a phenomenal book. I emailed Jeff, and I just said, I didn't think you could do better than the original, and you have. I mean, it was just a phenomenal book. But one of the main ideas of this book is the statement, ideas have consequences. What people believe determines how they live. Ideas have consequences. And I can't think of any better illustration of this. There's a short little story. It's called The Disciple, written by a guy named Paul Burgett. You probably haven't read it. It's not an extremely popular book. I have not even read this book, but I saw an excerpt of it from a book that Dallas Willard wrote. And in The Disciple, he tells this story. He said, in prison, awaiting trial for murder, this young disciple had written an account of what he had done and how those liberating doctrines, enthusiastically discussed in the abstract, had worked out in the actual practice. The results are only frequently a matter of murder, but the world, as well as individual, rides upon the waters of an ideational sea. The killing fields of Cambodia come from philosophical discussions in Paris. And I want to highlight this right here. So the story is The Disciple. It's a fiction story, but there was a young man who would study under this teacher. And this teacher, who many considered to be one of the nicest people in the world, would never hurt a fly. He was always studying and always teaching these ideas, but would never do anything in practice. And so he was called to a trial, to an inquiry, and he found out that one of his students was on trial for murder, which he found rather odd, because this student was a rather good student. And what he found out was that his ideas had implication in this young man's life, and this young man took those ideas and put them into practice. And so what Dallas Willard says here, the killing fields of Cambodia come from philosophical discussions in Paris. What our kids believe to be true will determine the way that they live. Now, the living is the end result. So we look at the way they live and we go, man, we got to change the way that they live. No, we We have to change the way that they think. Ideas have consequences. We have to change the way our kids are thinking. What are some of the ideas that are prevalent today in our culture? Well, I think we're seeing one of the greatest ones. I mean, we can talk about some of the crime and the wars, but I think just a quick look at the statistics on abortion, huge implications. And it's not that they're just bad people that support abortion, they're bad people. No, they really genuinely believe something to be true. There's something that they hold true. And what I've found in most of my examples of kind of talking with people is that there's usually a story behind what they believe to be true that's influencing the way that they think, it's biasing them. You think about 9/11, there are implications of that. That wasn't just an attack, that was an ideology that played out an attack. There were people who got up on September 11th, 2001, and here's the crazy part. They thought what they were doing was right. They didn't get up that morning thinking, man, we shouldn't do this. This is a bad thing. They legitimately believed that morning that what they were doing was what they were supposed to be doing. And we look at that and we go, how could anybody think that way? They do think that way. Just like you and I think a certain way. Ideas have consequences. And the only way that we can stop people from acting out wrongly is by changing the way that they think, by changing what they believe. You look at the Holocaust, 6.6 million Jews estimated were killed by an ideology. If you take the writings of Adolf Hitler and Mein Kampf and you take Darwin's Origin of Species and you put them side by side, you see there's a lot of overlap. What Darwin believed, Hitler adopted, and he said, yeah, I believe that, survival of the fittest, the superior race, the Aryan nation. Ideas have consequences. Now, these are the results, these are the actions, but all of these trace back to an idea that people believe to be true. The unborn is not a person. 9/11 was necessary for the movement. The Holocaust was survival of the fittest. And if you look at what Darwin wrote, and if you look at what Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf, you start to understand why Hitler thought the way that he did. Hitler believed he was doing what was right. And it's easy and it's too simplistic for us to say, well, he was a bad person that did bad things. He was a bad person, he did do bad things, but it was because he believed something to be true about humanity. He didn't believe that all humanity was created in the image of God. He believed that humanity was a part of a species, of a process. And there were good species and there was bad species. And Hitler was going to say, we're going to raise up the good species and we're going to eradicate the bad species. It was an idea that played out in the killing of 6.6 million Jews. You want to end events like the Holocaust, you have to change the way people think. We have to change the way our students think about things. We can't just tell them what to think. We have to help them come to that conclusion with the guidance and the structure of the conversation we have in our Bible classroom. If ideas have consequences, then how do we prevent the spreading of wrong ideas? So how do we help our students not buy into these wrong ideas? I mean, if it's in culture, if it's in television shows, if it's in music, if it's in their friendships, how do we help our students make the right decisions? I think we have to enter into their world, and I think we have to start having those conversations. There was a great story. There was a researcher in the 1980s, William McGuire. He was at, I believe, Marquette University. And William McGuire wanted to test this theory, this idea that ideas had consequences. And he wanted to find out if there was a way to prevent the spread of wrong ideas. And his theory was that ideas are like viruses. And so this time of year, especially in the Midwest, what are we doing? We're getting vaccinations. And for those of you that know how vaccinations work, you're actually giving the person the infection. You're taking a weakened form of the virus and you're injecting it into a person's body so that you start to build up antibodies and you start to build up resistance so that when you come in contact with the real thing, you're prepared, you're ready. So that's why when you go to Target and you get the shot, you go home and you maybe run like a low-grade fever, you don't really feel very well, your body's building up resistance so that when the time comes, you're prepared for the conversation. So his hypothesis was if ideas are like viruses and we can prevent viruses from spreading by giving vaccinations, can we prevent the spread of wrong ideas by talking about some of these things? Now, he had to challenge this theory because that's what a good researcher does. He presents a hypothesis, he tests the hypothesis, and then he comes to a conclusion. And so he wanted to put a wrong idea out there, but realizing that a wrong idea could have implications. And so he didn't want to hurt anybody, so he had to come up with an idea that was going to expose what people believed, but also not hurt them. And so he had another researcher come in, and he was going to teach these students that brushing your teeth was bad. It was actually bad for you. It removed the natural enamel. It removed the natural protection that was wired inside of you. And so people should not brush their teeth. And so they had 6 different groups, all had different amount of information. The first group had no preparation. They came into the classroom. Dr. McGuire said, hey, there's a lecture today. I want you to go into this room, listen to this guy, and then come back here and then answer some questions. So the students go in, they listen to a presentation about how brushing your teeth is bad. You shouldn't brush your teeth. They came out, they answered some questions. The next group comes in, and what Dr. McGuire just simply reviews what they know. Hey, you guys remember that big toothbrush in elementary school? You guys remember all that? Okay, I want you to go listen to this lecture. Listen to him. He's going to tell you how it's bad. Come back here, take this test. Well, the third group, Dr. McGuire warns them. Hey, this guy's going to tell you some stuff. I think you need to be careful about what you're going to hear. Just make sure you guys, don't really believe any of that. They go in, they listen to the lecture, they come back, they take the test. The fourth group, he inoculates. Now, inoculate's not a word we use all the time, but it's the idea of a vaccination. He kind of started to train them to say, hey, here's what he's going to say, and here's what we really want you to understand about it. So they would listen, they went in, they took the lecture, they came out, they took the test. The fifth group, he inoculated and he refuted. Hey, he's going to say this, but we really know this to be true. Hey, he's going to say this, but we really know this to be true. They went in, they took the lecture, they came out, they took the test. And then the last group, can you guys see that at all? This one's probably a little bit better. He inoculated, he refuted, and he made them think about it. He really helped them to own this. He really walked through it with them. This is really what we would say like our biblical worldview. Those students, they went in, they listened to the lecture, they came out, and they took the test. The results came back, and here's what he found. 6 different groups, 6 different amounts of information, all were presented with the same lie that brushing your teeth was bad. Here are the results. The group that was most susceptible to believing the lie was the group that merely reviewed what they knew. The group that was least susceptible to believing the lie was those students who they inoculated, they refuted, and they made them think. This is what we have to do in our classrooms. We have to help our students see the world around them. And what's scariest about this is when you start talking about the paradigm of the way we've done church, the paradigm of the way we've done Christian education and Bible classes, a lot of times what are we doing? We're reviewing what we know with students. And we say, well, what does the Bible say? And we bring up these stories, which these stories are good. We should tell these stories. We should have our students have an understanding of these stories. But what I've noticed in my conversation, especially in today's culture, is our students are going, so what? I mean, you told me a story in a book, but how do I even know that book is true? How is this book any different than this book? How is this book have any? And they're actually coming with informed opinions about this. Well, how do we even know we got the right gospels? And so we have to help our students wrestle with this. We have to help them understand so that when they leave, they go, man, brushing your teeth is not a bad thing. It's a really good thing. And let me give you 3 reasons why. Not just to blindly agree with what we tell them. My freshman students, we taught a logic, worldview, and apologetics class. And the second half of the semester, we would do a lot of apologetics stuff. And how do we know the Bible is trustworthy? How do we know that Jesus Christ rose from the dead? Problem of evil. We kind of wrestle through some of these things. And I would tell my students, you guys are not going to remember a lot of what I told you this year. And they're like, yeah, that's right. I said, don't agree with me on that one. I said, but you'll forget a lot of this stuff. And that's fine. I said, but worst case scenario. I said, my prayer is that when you guys go into a different situation, maybe it's a college or a hostile environment, and somebody brings up one of these objections, you would say, oh, I've heard that before. And I think it should start in the classroom. I think it should start in our classrooms where we start bringing this to the table and saying, hey, here's what people are saying about Christianity. Let's talk about this.